Still not hearing the music.
It's coming through in a minute.
Cool. I mean, when I've been watching this, oh, now I can, yeah.
Right, brilliant.
Very cool.
Morning everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Leaders Live, breakfast show. This morning we're just sort of tuning up, getting ready for the big show and
the big show.
But just relaxing into it really. So this is this is my Uncle Peter's A Minor Blues playing here. So
wow.
Yeah, it's really cool. I've claimed it as my theme tune actually, which he doesn't mind, but it's not mine, it's his. But yeah. So I just make a reference to the fact that this is my
do you
my
play
Uncle
guitar
Peter's.
as well?
I wish. Yeah, I'm just not musical in that way. So
you play air guitar then?
Play air guitar, yeah, something like that. That's right. Yeah, I play that really well, actually.
Yeah. Hey, the Olympics. That should be in the Olympics. If breakdancing can be in, it should be.
Dead right. Yeah, that would be good, wouldn't it? Olympic sport. Well,
there
we go. Good stuff. Let's just turn the music off. Just bear with me. Well, it's a Tuesday morning, folks, here in the UK, and it's just after 8:45, and we're coming alive with 8:45. We're streaming out to LinkedIn, we're streaming out to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. It's just, I'm always blown away by this technology and how the heck that all works.
Brilliant.
It's just incredible, isn't it?
Isn't it amazing?
Isn't it amazing? Yeah. So
for our generation, it is totally science fiction.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have dreamt about this in our childhood, right? In the 70s,
totally.
We'd have dreamt about. Well, for me, it was the 70s. It's actually the 60s as well. But there we go. So anyway, folks, look. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are. Welcome to this Leaders Live breakfast show. We've had an unavoidable change, so if you're expecting that we're talking about business branding today, well, actually that's now in September, so instead. But today we have the amazing Ian Price in the room this morning.
Oh, very kind, Andrew, very kind, thank you.
I'm going to come back to you in a minute. I just want to set up a bit of a teaser for us this morning. I'm just wondering why I can't see us live. Yes, I can see us live now, so that's good. So just checking that we're on. Yeah, we've got people on already. Thanks, Ian, for the comment. Right, okay, so quick teaser. So you may be familiar, folks, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs and that popular pinnacle of self-actualization, at the top of Maslow's hierarchy. And we'll kind of explore what the heck does that mean today. But the interesting thing is that, I don't know if you know this, but Maslow never ever suggested how the heck you reach that pinnacle of self-actualization. So, and yet we all know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and if you don't, we'll learn about it today. So with brain scientist Dr. Ian Price, we discuss what is this inner work needed to train our brains for a change to apply Maslow's self-actualization in a practical way, right? And all this and a lot more in this interview chat this morning. So if you don't know me, I'm Andrew Jenkins. As always, please, I encourage you to interact with us and ask us lots of questions. We'll pick those up as you're going along. Smash those likes too, folks. I really appreciate that. And please let me know if our audio is coming through okay as well. That would be really useful. So this morning, as I've said, I'm joined by, for the second time, part 2 of the awesome Dr. Ian Price talking about our brains and the way they work. Hi, Ian.
Hi, Andrew.
Great to have you on
Thank you for having me back. Oh, that's great.
You're welcome. So you actually, Ian, actually there's a claim to fame here. You were the very first person I interviewed on Leaders Live way back in May time. So excited to have you here again.
And we learned together, right? Because I remember that I was horizontal that way, trying to work out how to get the camera that way. So. Yeah. But learn by doing. That's
learn by doing.
About,
yeah.
Right?
There's no such thing as failure, right? All of those things.
No,
so let me just give you a round of applause. So.
Thank you very much.
It cost me a fortune to hire that crowd.
What, 99p?
Yeah. Brilliant.
Good stuff.
Look, today we're talking about this. It's a fascinating session this morning, folks. We're talking about brain states, brain waves, and how to use your brain for a change. And
absolutely, which is so on it, right? Because that's exactly what we're in the middle of. Even more possibly now than any other time, and I know that in our lifetimes at least, the thing is how do we cope with it, and how do we make the most of it? And then we have this amazing bit of kit, which is our brain. And last time we talked about this, we said, well, it can be your best friend and it can be your worst enemy.
Worst enemy, I remember that.
So what we're about today is to try and say, look, expand that a little bit more and make it as practical as possible, with a little bit of philosophy and fun and humour added in, edutain. How we use our brains to get the most out of change, because ultimately change is about growth. And really, if you are a leader, you've got to be about growth. Has to be.
Well said. And we've just been through incredible 18 months worth of pandemic, right? And it's cost us, right? I can certainly attest to that. And you've set the scene really well there, that actually the important thing is that this is about our overall well-being and being resourceful. And the one thing that I notice about our brains is that we do train our brains to be, we can train our brains to be anxious and worried, and a lot of people do, right? And it's changing times and in technology, it's a very easy way to go, and yet it's not necessarily the most resourceful way for us to use our brains.
Absolutely, Andrew. I mean, I think as both of us as coaches, we're working with clients, and one of the key things is to try and orientate or help our clients to orientate towards the goal, rather than the obstacle. Because the classic thing is, if we're looking at the obstacle, guess what happens? There's some amazing clips on Instagram actually about this. I don't know, Kook Slams it's called. You get this amazing ability to crash into something you're trying to avoid. And you're looking at it, and the
isn't it true? Yeah,
it's so true. And this is the problem with the way the brain works. Partly is how we inadvertently sometimes train it to look at a problem, and then we see the problem rather than the solution.
Indeed.
And the problem is, the more we see the problem, the more the brain goes, oh, I know what you're asking me to do is see more of the problem. Yeah. So the problem becomes bigger. And I think it was, Steve Covey who said, the problem is not the problem. The problem is how you see the problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. Captain Jack Sparrow in the Pirates of the Caribbean nicked that line, which I love, actually.
But I didn't know that was the case.
Yeah.
In Pirates of the Caribbean, I didn't know that.
So
but that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
If we're looking at the problem, that's what we see, that's what we get, rather than looking at the solution. Far more likely to make that.
Yeah, I've just got this comment on Facebook. I can't quite see the comments on Facebook, but
you get what you focus on. Where you focus on goes, your energy flows.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bang on. Whoever's put that in there, absolutely
and
spot on.
Perception is your reality, right?
100%.
Totally, isn't it? If we perceive that we're going to hit the ball in the water if we're playing golf, then you've got a better chance of hitting it in the water than you have avoiding the water, right?
Yeah, and I think there's something else there, which is when creatures or brains that are made not to act in isolation. So, your perception is your reality. Now, if you want to have a really strong team and have strong leadership, that's about having other perspectives in play. Because if you haven't, you are limiting your reality quite literally. So again, absolutely, your perception is your reality. But how can you change your reality, or rather your perception of reality, to be more real?
Yeah.
And that's not just wishful thinking, people. Because I think one of the things people go is, oh, yeah, that's great. That's you just wishful thinking. No, not. I'm trying to say, look, if you can have, without judgment, and that is very tricky, by the way, but without judgment, different perspectives on the same problem and actually more likely solution, you are far more likely to get what you're after. In fact, probably something you didn't even think of would come out of that.
Yeah, and quite often when I'm working with teams, I remind them of, and many of us will have seen this, and you guys listening, the sketch of it's a picture of an old woman or a young woman, and you notice what you notice. Some people notice the old woman, some people notice the young woman, and that's just a brilliant descriptor of exactly what you're saying. What you focus on is what you get. And although we might have a tendency for seeing one or the other, or in what you're talking about, either a resourceful state or a negative state, an unresourceful state, we might have a preference to that. But we can see a different view, and the more we see the different view, the better our brains get at kind of accepting that.
Absolutely. And once we've seen that, I think there's a number of meta learning, so the bigger learning that's going on there. Right. I think one is, when you've seen that there is different pictures within that picture, different ways of interpreting it, it helps you with other pictures to interpret that. I mean, the classic example is you go from that to the spots that you can't see but actually makes up a Dalmatian. Well, once you've seen that Dalmatian, you can't unsee it, which is really interesting. But it then helps your brain go, oh, I wonder if something else is going on.
Yeah.
And there's this amazing thing called subjective contours, which I love, which is a way in which the brain actually starts to make meaning out of stuff.
Like dots and find a pattern, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
But going back to the old woman, young woman picture, what I find amazing is that our brains struggle to see both at the same time. Can see either one or the other. Now, I've tried really hard, Andrew, and I think I'm close to be able to see both at the same time, but I'm not sure if that's my brain just literally going like with a page, boom, 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 boom.
Flip flop, flip flop, flip flop,
flip flop, flip flop. Yeah, so I don't know, but apparently that, again, that's interesting. So you're absolutely right. If we're not careful and we're only the people that see, for instance, the young woman, then that's that we're missing so much of the meaning that's right in front of us. And similarly, obviously, if you're just seeing the old woman, and if you don't know what we're talking about, because I think there might be some people listening to us go, "What are they?
What is that?
What are they talking about?" We'll make sure that there's an image at some point.
Spot on. I'm sure. I will make sure that there is an image. Yeah. Okay. Super. So what happens, Ian? In our brains, when we go from that kind of normal, balanced, integrated left-right, integrated state, when we're calm, we're objective, we're flowing nicely, to, that kind of anxiety-loaded state that many of us saw in the pandemic, for example, but also the stressful lifestyle that we get from living in this rapidly changing world. What's happening in our brains to get to that state, and vice versa, Ian.
Yeah. Okay, so the main one really is about somebody's talking about where our attention goes, the energy flows.
Yeah,
absolutely. And the issue is that really, from a survival point of view, we feel under threat.
Okay.
And we begin to train our brain either sort of acutely that there is threat, or that there is chronic, as in ongoing threat. But either way, what happens is that our body and our brain revs up to see threat more easily, but it also closes down the breadth of what it can see. So the issue is that you then become, say, going back to our thing about the problem, you start to see the problem more completely, as in taking up all of your sort of vision, than actually all the other possibilities that might be there. So a classic example, and it's a fantastic video of somebody going down a ski slope at breakneck speed, not breaking their neck, but going down breakneck speed through these trees, and you look at it and you go, how on earth did he not hit the trees? And then you look at the cam, and it's actually sort of on the helmet, and you see that actually they're aiming for the gaps. And it's the same thing here, right? If your focus goes onto the problem, then you which is the tree. I might hit the tree. Guess what? It's going to hit a tree. But actually, if you can train your brain to go, actually, there are other possibilities. And this is the other thing about then sort of this is all about the prefrontal cortex, by the way. That's the front bit of our cortex. Yeah. Okay. Is you are limiting the ability for the prefrontal cortex to behave because in a way of being creative and thinking, because the brain feels under threat. And actually, if the brain's under threat, it needs to do something, and it needs not to think about it. Because if it thinks about it too much, that time, going back to sort of Stone Age times and before, might mean that you get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. So so stress, ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that stress narrows our field of view about what is possible.
Yeah.
And the dangerous part about that, Andrew, is that yes, it might work in the short term, but in the long term, it means that we miss a lot of opportunities that might come our way
because we're narrow-minded.
Absolutely. Right. And there's a part of our brain called the reticular activating system.
Oh, you talked about that last time.
Yeah, we talked about that last time, didn't we? And that's again bringing to mind what is important, what is salient, so literally from moving from the subconscious into the conscious and making aware. And again, the danger is that we are so focused on the problem, that's all that our reticular activating system is looking for. And it's just at the time, by the way, that people need to be able to think creatively. I don't think it's an accident that people who are in elite sport, particularly if there's a competitive element, and certainly if it's competitive in some way, enter a state in which they deliberately train themselves to feel the fear. I mean, it's like the climbing actually as well. Feel the fear, but then not to let it narrow their view on what is possible.
So they utilise
that is the trick of a leader. If a leader can feel the fear, and by the way, bravery is not the absence of fear. Bravery, C.S. Lewis talks about this, is having the fear and doing it anyway. Yeah. Because there's something more important. Yeah. And again, I think what we're trying to say is with when we're coaching with clients, particularly, I think both of us is like saying, well, actually, let's accept the fear, but let's help our bodies calm that fear so that we can, again, widen our field of view, so that we see the possibility and the opportunity, see the gaps, so that we can make the connections that we need to do to actually get out of the situation. And for us, I think this is the thing about being human. Yeah. As an animal, we're really fortunate that we're not unique in the terms of having fantastic brains. Sort of cetaceans, whales, and dolphins have amazing brains. Chimps have amazing brains too. But the ability to really use this brain to think our way properly out of difficult situations, and then make the most of it, because we've learnt from it. We've made the connections that we need, both in our own brain and between other people's brains, and as a group.
Brilliant. So, I like that. And it sounds to me that what you're saying there is that one of the tricks to calm an overactive, fearful brain state, if you like, we'll come on to brain states in a minute, is to just see it as information. And that sounds like what the accomplished sportsman can do is of course, sense the fear, but turn that fear into information and then use it as something to drive something forward instead of retracting from it, running away from it, or fight or flight. Tanya talks about fight or flight here. Let's see if I can bring her up for a moment. Okay. I'm interested in how much more intensity of fight or flight responses people are in trauma, bipolar 2 or similar. I'm sure there are successful business people that have some form of psychological barriers that they deal with, albeit B personalities disorder or some those kind of things.
So that is really interesting, Tanya. Absolutely, I'm very interested in something called neurodivergence or neurodiversity, from the point of view of neuroinclusion, but also because because the thing is, right, if you think about what we're paying people to do, leaders to really do at the moment, is to think. Age-old 19th century was all about, paying people to make things. 20th century really was about information and gathering information. I'm being very, simplistic here. But now it is that this is how you leverage thinking. Well, if you're going to leverage thinking, there's this crazy idea, I think, that that we're going to aim to be normal, to be the sort of standard. But actually, we have this breadth of thinking because we all have different. We all think differently, and we all have neurodivergence. And what you're talking about there is disorders where, and again, I work with a lot of people, including athletes or Paralympians. One of the things that I've been most impressed by working with such people is their ability to have ability in their disability. And I know there'll be people here thinking that sounds. I know. Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds, and as somebody who's probably able-bodied but who's dyslexic, I feel that could be very easy to say, but it's so true. So, how do people who have neurodiversity deal with pressure? That's a really interesting question, and I think it's something that it can have pros and cons. So, one of Andy McNabb, who was in the SAS Bravo 20, worked with a neuroscientist, and they wrote a book together called The Good Psychopath, and it was all about how actually sometimes we need neurodiversity where we have a psychopathic tendency without being the psychopath that kills people. Because they need the neurodiversity. We need the neurodiversity for people who are like surgeons or lawyers to make decisions that are really, really difficult and then go and sleep at night.
And then go
because but then we also need people who are incredibly empathetic and nurturing. So that neurodiversity is really important. And just going back to the fight flight, I'd also point out there's two others. There's fight, flight, freeze or flop.
That's right, indeed. Yeah, absolutely.
And our brains want to do all of that. And absolutely fantastic comment, Tanya. And I'd love to. We could talk about that for ages. Neurodiversity, what that brings, what that could bring to you and your team. Is immense, I believe. And then that starts changing, how do we orientate workspace? Now working from home, what does that mean? Can we work more to our neurodiversity and actually leverage that within our teams to get higher performing teams that are more adaptive to the current working climate? And again, the difference is, are you going to try and go back to normal like this, or actually you're going to try and go, well, actually, do you know what? We've got fantastic resources in our people.
Absolutely, and forgive them for their foibles as well. And Tanya goes on to say, what tools successful people use to overcome such predispositions. We'll come back to that, Tanya, just to let you know that we've kind of picked that up. I want to kind of, I'm interested in picking up something that I was reminded of the other day about brain states and brain waves, and this whole thing about beta, alpha waves, and the more subconscious we go from beta into alpha waves, and alpha waves into theta into delta. Is there any science behind this, Ian? And if, what give us a bit of background about that from your perspective.
Okay, so there's tons of science. I mean, we are bioelectric beings, right? Yeah. And our brains are bioelectric. So that means we use energy to create potential difference across membranes, which are literally your cell membranes. Yeah. And that then creates, the conductive force that you need for making thought happen, basically, for making action happen within your body as well.
I love the way you describe that.
And then if you have a cap, so what you can do is, you can do it for the whole body, but what you can do is you can put a cap on with electrodes, a little bit like if you look at ECG, but on your head. And it's like a glorified shower cap. It's amazing to put on, actually. Yeah. I used to put it on when I did it. I had to put like conductive gel on as well.
Oh, groovy!
Made my hair go a bit like yours, Andrew. But so the thing is that if we were to measure across the brain, I think if you look at sort of 10 billion neurons, which is quite a lot,
10 billion
you
neurons.
Might get
wow.
You get something in the region of to the 10,000th of a volt. I think that's sort of in that sort of region. Which doesn't sound a lot, but obviously if you're using it across the brain, what you can do is you can actually measure the electrical conductivity. And what we tend to get then is that we can then look at the electrical conductivity as a field, as if you like, produced by the brain, passes towards the sensor. It creates a movement on a graph. Well, actually, it was in my day. Again, it was on a piece of paper tracing. But what you can do is then sort of plot that as a waveform, right? So as the depolarization goes towards the sensor, then you get a movement one way, and then vice versa. Okay. So you get this waveform, and then these waveforms we now know are associated globally with various different states. So with an EEG, so electroencephalogram, which is what that is, this glorified thing that you put on your head. Yeah. We see all brain states mixed up. But what happens is if we're in certain states, one predominates. So as you said, if we are really, really sleepy and feeling sleepy, that would be alpha. So you'd see this alpha, and alpha is it's lower frequency, sort of slightly lower amplitude. And again, for those of you that can see this, it's like if you see like a sine wave, it's actually, again, frequency is how much within a second, if you like, how many cycles within a second, and amplitude is how big the signal is, so how big the depolarization or the difference between, active and non-active, if you like, can be. Okay. So absolutely, tons of science in it, and it's been used for decades since really the 70s. Biofeedback in particular, which is another where we're going. Since the 70s, slightly fell out of fashion with fMRIs, so the magnetic resonance imaging. Okay. But the great thing with the EEGs is it's far more accessible to us. Yeah, this is great.
I thought I'd just bring this up for a moment. So beta's like our normal day-to-day stuff, right? When we're in meetings and when we're working and when we're doing the stuff at work, right? 60 thoughts a minute, apparently, whatever a thought is. Okay, we could debate that forever, but
we could.
And interestingly, alpha drops slightly below that, so we're at half the number of thoughts, and we're starting to get into a more relaxed state. Not quite asleep yet, but it's a relaxed. I call this a visualization state. Where we're dropping into, when someone in a meeting sort of says, "Well, imagine what if we did X," and everyone goes, "Oh yeah," and that's alpha, right? Suddenly you start to visualize a potential future. And if we really focus, and this is more we can do on our own, is going from alpha to theta, and that's more meditation. We'll talk about that later, and that's the goal of meditation, to really slow down the thoughts. But where we're now activating more of the unconscious side of our brain, the sort of more right-hand part of our brain, if you like, and bringing that into play. And then the more we go deeper into delta, we're down to 10 thoughts a minute, but that's kind of approaching sleep, right? So, but I thought this was a really interesting way of looking at the way our brains work, and making some linkages here, Ian.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this actually, this graphic, because I think it shows how really we are very busy. When we're
Yeah.
busy, actually, ironically, there's less space almost to make
Right.
more random creative connections.
Less
But when we,
bandwidth, right?
yeah, and it is
Yeah.
absolute. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Because we're bioelectric,
Yeah.
we only have a finite amount of energy during the day to expend on using our brain.
Cool.
So if we're using it to do the task we're doing, there's less space to make creative leaps. Whereas if you can slow down,
Right.
and that's where nicely comes in. Well, there's two things. I mean, delta is very important, obviously, in sleep, particularly. So it's the regenerative part of part of sleep happens within the delta wave.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't see delta in somebody really unless they were asleep.
Yeah, or very young, perhaps. You know. So
I mean, again, young people have
Yeah.
a much greater ability to induce delta and sustain it. Actually, as we get older, we struggle to maintain delta in sleep, which is arguably partly where some of our health problems become come from, because our bodies are not able to have that same level of regenerative sleep as we would like. Yeah.
So there's some links here, isn't there, between high performance and low performance, and the high state of thinking and more relaxed ways of thinking. Plus, if we look at optimum resourceful state versus unhealthy well-being or not well-being states, I wonder whether there's that linkage there as well, that we're not giving our brains enough time to regenerate. So sleep patterns,
absolutely,
but also spending time in theta and alpha and just calming our brains down. Where if they're on beta all the time, it narrows down the possibilities, right, and the potentialities.
And again, we're
narrow
doing
thinking.
This.
Yeah, get it.
We're not doing it. So absolutely, Andrew. I think as important as beta is for our kind of our ability to focus and do the job in hand, something that we're competent at.
Skills.
That's kind of where we should be really most of the time if we're doing a job, for instance.
And I guess when we're driving, we drop out of that and we go to a lower state because it's all unconscious, right? Because
if you are competent, and particularly if you're driving a long time, as in you have been driving for a long time, so it's and that you're driving over a protracted period of time, so doing a long journey, and that's why and when theta happens, I mean, I love that theta is when the best, I think, and we talked about this before, haven't we, Andrew, you and I together? Theta is fascinating because that is when you get these creative leaps that seem to come out of nowhere. So you'll be driving along, taking a shower, just
hopefully
doing
not
something.
At the same time.
Not at the same time. I've not seen that happen.
Not me. No, but you can visualise that, right?
I'm trying to. What could possibly go wrong?
Exactly.
But that's the thing is, we're ironing or we're washing up, and then we're doing something quite mundane, and then we get into this sort of theta state, and that's where we can have a very, very creative. And you're absolutely right, Andrew. I'm as guilty as anybody trying to pack the day with I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm being productive. But this is going back to the sort of 19th century way of thinking about it. To be productive, you have to be really busy all the time.
Yeah. So Ian, look, I'd like to take a moment and connect some dots for ourselves here, and the audience sort of tuning in here. I'd like to explore for a moment the relationship between Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that pinnacle right at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I'm sure most of you will know that. I'll put a diagram up in a minute for those of you who don't. And right at the very top of Maslow's hierarchy is this thing called self-actualization, right? And I'm just wondering if there's a linkage here. And I wonder if we could explore it for a little while, between the different brain states we've just been talking about, and then going through Maslow's hierarchy. And the higher up we go, I'm wondering whether we need more access to a balanced, integrated state of being able to access theta, alpha and beta waves all at the same time.
I think you've absolutely encapsulated that. I mean, I think you've almost done my job for me. Because that's it. I mean, that really is it. I mean, if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, obviously the base are the deficiency things that we're trying to meet. So, have I got heat, food, light, all that sort of things. Safety. And then as we go up to that, we get to the sort of relationships. And again, I think it's interesting that, the breadth of the base of the triangle, I see that as there's a lot of those things. And as we go up, there's fewer people that we might have relationships with, or rather that sort of meaningful relationship, and that's where we get our esteem from. And I think what we're talking about, self-actualization, is this next step. It's this next step of transcendence, really, about who am I, what am I for, what am I here for, what's my why, as Simon Sinek would say. And actually, I think it's more than that, Andrew. I think it's realizing in this life that actually that we are fulfilling that. And the interesting thing for me is that actually, as we go up this sort of stage towards self-actualization, our motivation to change things as they are met diminishes. But actually, with self-actualization, it's completely the opposite. It's the more we see ourselves as being self-actualized, the more we actually want to do something about it. And this is, I think, where we get really successful people. Those top 2%ers. It's almost enlightenment, actually, Tanya. I agree. I mean, there's neurological levels as well. Talk about this, NLP, which I know you're a master practitioner of as well, Andrew. So the same things, the greater cause, the greater whatever it is. Absolutely, enlightenment. So self-enlightenment. And I think what we're saying here is that actually, if we're not careful, how do we get those creative leaps or make those connections and have awareness of that? If we're stuck in, certainly in beta and even in gamma, when we feel very much under threat and we have to make, our brains have to operate
really
like that.
Right?
Are we limiting our growth, our ability to be, as you say, as Tanya says, to be enlightened about oneself, if we're not giving ourselves opportunity to enter into that theta? I mean, delta should come with sleep, but definitely theta, and alpha should be happening anyway, really, because alpha's like sort of slightly switching off, about to go to sleep, really, kind of thing.
Interesting. And Maslow spent a long time describing what. I mean, I was going to ask the question, and we were going to tease out this question. What is self-actualization anyway? It's a really hard thing to define, and yet Maslow had a good go at it here. And here's some of his ideas around the characteristics, he called them, of and you can see there's many of them. There's not just one thing, right? There's lots of things going on here. So clearer, more efficient perception of reality. We talked about that earlier. Openness to experience and appreciation, using both fear and other things, and using them, in different ways, and being open to experience. This whole thing about self-cohesion, what does that mean? Well, it probably means self-unity, wholeness, happy in our own skins, right? I like to call it. And I think that's so important. That increased spontaneity, expressiveness, aliveness are the things that he used to describe it. Embracing uniqueness, overcoming our conditioning, getting away from those anxiety states and those very narrow states that we end up in and we condition our brain to. Increased objectivity and detachment. I really like that detachment thing. That's something I have to work at for myself. Greatly increased creativeness. We talked very early on about, the brain is a creative thing, and if we narrow it too much, we lose the creativity process. And he really says that part of self-actualization is the expression of creativity here. Improved interpersonal relationships, absolutely. The warmth with other people. And last week I talked to Roger Terry, and we were talking about rapport and how important that is. And the week before that, talking to Andrew Wilmot about meditation, and actually we'll come on to that because that's part of the self-actualization process. And here's the bottom line, which I think is so powerful. Love, acceptance, compassion, gratefulness, and forgiveness. There's some spiritual concepts that we've lost touch with a lot of the time. We don't feel okay with these. What say you, Ian?
I absolutely. I was just going to the deeper wisdom, and as Tanya says, it's about enlightenment. It's about to be self-enlightened about yourself. And I think the interesting thing here is, I know that we live in a post-truth world, but actually, no, because you can say anything goes, and therefore it's true, because I say it is. But I think there's a flip that a little bit and say, well, actually, it's about is the meaning of life to understand yourself, know yourself. I mean,
know thyself, right? Yeah.
And and by the way, that's yourself, not somebody else.
Absolutely.
And I think it's Mark Twain said, be yourself, everybody else is taken, which I really like. But it might be Oscar Wilde, actually.
He was awesome, Mark Twain. He came out some pearlers. That's a great corker,
I think it might be Oscar Wilde. But they're both great.
Love it, though.
But here's the thing. So if that's the case, and I think the other word that's, as you're talking there, Andrew, is authentic. It becomes an authentic source, and actually, never, in theory, a never-ending source as long as you're alive of who you are and what you're about.
Absolutely.
And it's not about other people, and it's a replenishing kind of almost well of energy that actually not only is enjoyable for you and fulfilling for you, but is attractive to other people. And certainly as a leader, you will just have that resource because you're being authentic. You're not being somebody else. And I've had a lot of training in that, in a way, in being in front of a lot of work in schools, and kids are fantastic at spotting fakes.
Aren't they just?
So you have to be authentic. I'm really interested, Andrew, so about meditation, because this is something I don't do as much as I profess the importance of it, I suppose, or I'm talking about it, and this is my learning, just being honest. How do you do meditation? Because I know that you meditate.
Let me just I'm just going to take a step back before I answer that. And I think what's happening here is that we're looking at the stuff that Maslow talked about self-actualization, but he never described how the hell you do this. He just said, here's the qualities, go and do it, right? As if it was bleeding obvious. But it's not bleeding obvious. It's actually, what are the simple things, that we can do? Some of them more complicated, some of them, more involved, and what are the hacks that we can use to restore our brain? And one of those, I think, is a couple of simple things really. One, go for a walk, be in nature. Very powerful way of restoring our sense of who we are and what we're about. And taking that to a deeper level, I find meditation is a really powerful way of accessing those different brain frequencies, particularly alpha and theta that we talked about beforehand, and slowing down thoughts. I found it incredibly powerful. And Andrew Wilmot was on a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about this, and it reinforced the reason why I am meditating. I meditate regularly, and they do say that if you meditate twice a day, once when you get up in the morning, because when you get up in the morning you get serotonin, and then at night your brain switches to, is it melatonin? Is that what they call it?
Well, melatonin is part of the circadian rhythm, yes. So we'll get an increase in melatonin as you feel, as it's a part of the trigger for your body to go, it's time to go to sleep. It's
time to go to sleep. So at those 2 points, I find it really powerful to meditate. So, someone said, and I've forgotten who this is, that you get up with Sarah and you go to bed with Mel. I don't mean anything by that, folks. It's just an expression, right?
Just say that Andrew is married to a Sarah.
Sarah, but not to a Mel,
Sarah, if
right?
you're listening, be careful of Mel, that's all I'm saying.
So it's just a phrase, right? But I find that the biorhythms are really quite important there. But for me, it takes about 20 minutes. It's effortless. And sometimes it's hard to reduce the number of thoughts, but really weirdly, counterintuitively, by thinking about not thinking, then I end up not thinking so many thoughts. Sometimes just focusing on a simple thing like a flower, for example. I like marguerites, the white flower with the yellow, the big daisies basically. And I focus on those because they're a bright image, and that starts to think about my alpha, and I start to see them in a field, and I visualize those, and I focus on the flower. And then I think about flower, and I break it down into flow, the flow state, being the
like it,
and I start to really focus on that, and little by little I notice that my breathing starts to drop. It takes about 5-10 minutes, and then weirdly, at about the 10-minute mark, maybe the 15-minute mark, and it takes a little bit of practice to do this, suddenly my thought process junk, and I feel it's like a weird transcendence. It's like really strange. It's like my brain state is like it's completely aware. It's like it's looking at a void. And that's how I do it. And it's a really comfortable thing. So I'm wide awake, but my body is completely relaxed. And so all my energy now is firing up these brain circuits rather than being absorbed and wasted through
without judgment, right?
No judgment.
That's really important. And theta is part of how to make connections without the judgment. So
that's right.
There's an element of detachment.
Yeah, and I might drift into, something might pop up like a thought and things like that. But it's almost like the thoughts slow down, and rather than all being at the surface, they're quite deep level thoughts, and I can watch them percolate up to the surface, which I really quite like. And and after I've finished, and it takes 20 minutes, right? I feel really quite energized. And what I'm finding is that certainly I'd forgotten about it during lockdown. And it was only sort of coming out of lockdown that I was in a really bad state, and I went back to meditating again, because I was a regular meditator for years. And so since the spring and the summer period, I've been getting back to it. It's amazing how quick your brain responds. But, oh yeah, I remember how to do this, and it drops straight back into it again. And
yeah, it's a habit. It's a skill. The more you practice it,
So there's a little bit about meditation, and I find it incredibly,
And where do you? Just from a practical point of view, Andrew, are you sitting? Are you just sitting in the chair? Are you sitting on the floor? How do you do that?
Upright, never in a sleeping position. I don't find that. I think when you're in a sleeping position, your brain goes into delta too quickly. So always upright, hands really relaxed, hands on my lap, relaxed shoulders, and I go through a method where I just relax my forehead, my eyes, and I go down to my lips, and we hold a lot of energy around our jawbone and our lips and into our shoulders, and I drop all the way down to my toes and into my hands, and that takes 5-6 minutes, and I just feel the relaxation, and that's a bit of self-hypnosis that I use for that particular piece. And then
being present, you're bringing yourself to being present and aware of your body. There is there's talk about when theta actually helps your body to actually connect with itself as well, so you can be more detached from some things, making more strategic decisions, if you like, and connections, which again is that very open, wide view, without judgment. So again, you don't actually have to act upon it. I think that's one of the key things. And then the idea is that you have that perspective as well as having the energy then to do something about it if you want to. And I love the. I just theta. I just think is the place, because
powerful.
It's so powerful, and
it's that integrating and joining left and right brains, the unconscious to the conscious, and all of those things that we talk about. And this is a really practical way of doing it. Other things are visualization. Anchoring a positive state. Yoga, Tai Chi. They all link to the same thing. Brainwave training. I use one of these actually. And this is called a Mind Spa, and there's headphones that go into this, and there's a set of glasses that pump in, the alpha wave in light form and sound. Friggin' awesome! Technical term.
That's kind of partly training the brain through telling it. I mean, we've talked about this. There are other neurofeedback sort of biofeedback sort of kit that you can now get. The amazing thing is, first off, right, you can do this without actually needing any kit, because you can do meditations. But if you do, and now that with the advent of various different apps for how we hold attention, athletes again have been using this for years and years and years. Now it's something that we can literally have in the palm of our hand, with a little bit of kit that goes. It looks a little bit like, doesn't it? I've seen these like a glorified gaming headset. Slightly bigger.
Star Trek.
Very Star Trek.
Very Star Trek.
But it's not necessary. It's not absolutely necessary. But I think one of the things you've just hit on there, Andrew, is practice helps embed the habit.
Practice makes perfect.
A project that I'm involved with, which I know you know about, called the 52 Project, where Dottie Swanson and Jen Smith are with Digital Jen, and we've been looking at this with a number of different people. And the interesting thing is actually Jen is particularly interested in plants, and we had somebody come on, Hannah Powell, and she came on to talk about this as well, about forest bathing, the concept in Japan where actually connection with nature is seen, and we know actually physically, if we can do it, there's some organics that actually we can take on board, literally breathe in, which help relax us and help us actually raise our ability to fight off infection.
That's right.
But even just thinking about being in that space helps helps us, our brains, to slow down and to make more connections.
That's right.
Which I think is it's all about getting back in contact with our biology and the biology of our surroundings.
Totally. Going for a walk, goal setting, we mentioned earlier, time management, being involved in a community, and using other people around us to feel safe and belonging. All of these are important. Learning to be more disassociated with difficult things, and being centered, and sleep, nutrition, exercise, cold showers. All of those things are, they're all very important. And these are the bits that Maslow never talked about. But listen, Ian, we could talk for ages, and I know that you've got another appointment to go to. So, Ian, look, sum us up. Ian, what's the difference that makes the difference here? Give us a few tips.
The difference that makes the difference is to have an awareness of this. So if you've been coming into this, you might already been thinking, or might be thinking, how do I do this? How do I be more creative? How can I be more fulfilled? How can I have more life? Well, actually, there are steps that you can do to that. And if you are coming to this and knowing that there was things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I already use my brain, actually, you know what? This is an ongoing process. You and I are learning. Everybody's learning. The thing is, it's within your power to do something about it. And I think you have, honestly, it's the best most complex piece of kit that we know about in the universe, and it sits right between your ears. And again, I think it's just amazing, right?
Brilliant.
You don't have to pay for it.
No, it's all free.
You're blessed with it. But it's how you use it, and ultimately that is the thing. If you want to know more, obviously get hold of one of us.
Absolutely.
We'd love to be able to help you. Both you and I love. We get massive kicks out of seeing people unlocking their thinking, so that they can be the person that they want or need to be ultimately, and to go to that next level, which they didn't think was possible. And it's just an absolute privilege, and particularly when that's within leadership, because so much. And by the way, leadership can be being a parent, it can be running a small group, it can just be a volunteer. It doesn't have to be this glorified thing. I have to be like a super leader like Richard Branson.
Indeed. We're all leaders.
It's about
in our own way.
The consequence of unlocking that thinking that cascades to our communities and makes us all more.
And this is the new thinking, isn't it? For the this is I think this is a vogue that's happening in the 21st century, is that we're changing the way we think and becoming much more resourceful, and these things are becoming more front of mind. So listen, thanks, Ian. Brilliant to have you on the show. Just hang around just for a minute, but just very quickly, look, Leaders Live. It's before I talk about what was happening next week. I set Leaders Live up very purposefully to explore high performance topics, just like we've been talking about today, and chatting and interviewing people like Ian, with a mindset, with a passion to help leaders and businesses succeed. Just as Ian's just been saying a minute ago, in these rapidly changing times that we're living through, this is really important. And I think producing this type of community is massively, hugely important for all of us. And I do this because I believe it's important that this generation of business leaders really get success through the people factor, right? And therefore, I think Leaders Live really taps into this notion, which I love actually, this notion I've been exploring for a while, this innate superpower of I to the power of we. Love that I to the power of we. So next week, we've got Tilly Davis in the room, and she'll be talking about LinkedIn and how business leaders can grow their business effectively using LinkedIn and going beyond sort of lead generation and all those things, but looking at that in more detail. So that's for next week. So that's all, folks. It's a goodbye from me, and it's a good day from Ian. We'll see you next week. Cheers for now.
See you next
everybody.
time.